Chosen one. There is a specific moment that separates those who almost made it from those who actually did. It happens in the dark, in the silence, when the story looks like it has already been decided against you. That is when you chose to become dangerous, not loud or reactive, but quietly and completely unshakable. Whatever you did, it worked. You won. It's already yours. You made a decision so deep in your private silence that the opposition could never reach or reverse it. You were operating on a frequency that the wrong people simply did not have the equipment to detect. The plan was straightforward. Apply enough pressure, withdraw enough support, manufacture enough doubt, and eventually you would fold. That formula had worked on other people. The mechanics of wearing someone down, isolation, narrative control, sustained pressure, strategic withdrawal of opportunity are not complicated. And for a while, from the outside, everything looked like it was working exactly as designed. What the plan could not account for, and what no one had any intelligence on, was what was happening underneath the surface. While that operation was running in plain sight, you were doing something underground that no one had a framework to detect. Every layer of pressure that was applied, you converted into fuel. Every door that closed, you stopped wasting energy pushing against, and started building your own. Every piece of support that was withdrawn, you replaced with something that could not be taken away because it came from inside you, not from anyone else. You were forced into a total self-reliance that comfortable, externally validated people never develop because those people never have to. The devastating irony at the center of this story is that everything designed to end you was actually the most rigorous preparation you could have ever been given. The furnace was built for you. You were placed inside it, and then everyone waited for ash. What came out instead is still keeping certain people up at night. The opposition you faced was not random, and the difficulty was not accidental. When something is chosen for a specific purpose, when it carries a specific weight of destiny, the resistance it encounters is proportional to that weight. Ordinary paths do not attract sustained, organized, deliberate opposition. You did not end up in the middle of what you went through because of bad luck. You ended up there because something in you was worth that level of resistance. The size of what came against you was always a signal of the size of what was being protected inside you. The opposition was never fighting a nobody, they just did not understand what they had stumbled into. You need to go back to a specific season. It is a season that from the outside looked like nothing, like stagnation, like someone who had simply run out of road. You remember it, the stretch where nothing visible was moving, where you had no announcement to make, no progress to display, no proof to hand to the people who kept showing up with quiet smirks and questions designed as weapons. You were in the invisible season. And the invisible season has exactly one interpretation for anyone watching from the outside. It is over. Bamboo spends a long season underground before it ever appears above the surface. During that time, if you looked at the ground where an entire forest is about to explode into existence, you would see nothing but bare soil, no evidence, no indicators, just ground that looks like any other ground. And yet underneath that unremarkable surface, the root system is establishing itself at a depth and density that will eventually make what grows above it utterly impossible to uproot. The roots go first. The roots go deep. When the roots are finally ready, when the infrastructure is so complete, so interconnected, so strong that nothing can destabilize it, then and only then does the bamboo break the surface. And when it breaks, the growth is so rapid, it seems impossible. The growth was not sudden because it had finally started working. It was sudden because it had never stopped. That was you in the invisible season. You were not stagnating. You were establishing a foundation at a depth that could not be monitored and a density that could not be measured. You were studying yourself, really studying yourself in a way that only total quiet and total pressure makes possible. You were finding out what you were actually made of when all the external scaffolding was removed. You were making adjustments, tiny, invisible, compounding adjustments to how you thought, how you moved, who you allowed close, what you gave energy to, and what you deliberately starved of your attention. Your power source was assumed to be external, The assumption was that if the resources, the opportunities, the validation and the support were removed, you would have nothing left to run on. But your power source was never external, it was always internal. The season that was designed to drain you was actually the season in which you discovered just how deep your internal reserves went. The supply line was cut off from a person who had just discovered they did not need the supply line. That is not a small mistake. That is the defining mistake of this entire story. And something else was happening in that invisible season that matters even more. In the quiet, in the absence of noise and distraction, and the constant performance of being okay for other people, you started hearing something you had never been still enough to hear before. It was a direction, a knowing, a sense of what you were actually built for, that the busyness of your previous life had been drowning out. Most people spend their entire lives moving too fast to hear this. You were forced into the stillness that made it audible, and what you heard in that stillness became the blueprint for everything you built next. What felt like punishment was actually instruction. If you felt called by this message, hype this video so other chosen ones like you can be reached. Surviving the pressure is impressive, but there is a test inside the survival that is harder than the pressure itself. It arrives when you know exactly what is being done against you, you can see it clearly, and you have the full means to fight back in kind. The test is not whether you can survive the attack. The test is whether you can survive it without becoming the attacker. When you are in the middle of being wronged, really wronged, in ways that are clear and observable, the pull toward retaliation is not weakness, it is natural. It feels like justice, and so most people pick up the same weapons that were used against them and fight back. Sometimes they win the immediate battle, but they walk out of it carrying something heavy, a bitterness that narrows their vision, a cynicism that poisons what comes next, and a willingness to operate without integrity that once established is very hard to put back down. You chose differently. Be precise about what that choice actually was, because it was not passive, it was not weakness, and it was not forgiveness in any soft or comfortable sense of that word. It was strategy, cold, clear-eyed, disciplined strategy. You understood something that the opposition fundamentally did not. The moment you fight on someone else's level, you hand them the only victory they were ever actually capable of, making you small. The moment you lie to match a liar, you are a liar. The moment you scheme to match a schemer, you are a schemer. And once you become that, you cannot also be what you are actually built to be. You cannot occupy both positions simultaneously. You chose to stay exactly who you were. You chose character over comfort. You chose your future over your immediate feelings. You held the line on who you are, when holding that line was the most expensive thing you had ever done. And here is what most people miss about this moment. Every time you held the line, every time you had the opportunity to go low and chose not to, you were casting a vote for a specific version of yourself. Identity is not declared, it is accumulated. It is the sum total of every choice made when that choice cost something real. You voted for your highest self, repeatedly, in moments when voting differently would have been completely justified. That accumulated vote is what you are walking in now. That is the version of you that exists today, built not in comfort, but in the crucible of repeated, costly, unglamorous integrity. That version of you is untouchable, not because nothing can reach you, but because nothing that reaches you can change who you fundamentally are anymore. That question was settled in the fire. I must interrupt this transmission for just a moment. Are you really chosen? Prove it. It's easy to watch videos about chosen ones. It's another thing to put yourself to the test. If you're still here, that means something, but talk is cheap. Real chosen ones take action, and real chosen ones are also paying attention. You've noticed it, chosen one channels getting silenced, videos pulled, voices removed from the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice, and neither should you. That's why joining Destiny Engine is a 360 win. You support your favorite channels and fuel your own rise at the same time. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve divine justice. The beauty is, you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and watch your enemies choke on the rope their own lies created. If you're done consuming and ready to prove you're chosen, start your Destiny Engine trial today, risk-free. Join the Obsidian Inner Order live checks and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. You had everything required to go public, go loud and go scorched earth, and you chose to go quiet. That choice looked to everyone observing like retreat, like you lacked the nerve, like you had accepted the loss and were fading into exactly the background where you were always expected to end up. The opposition got comfortable with that interpretation. They let their guard down inside it. They started operating as though the threat you represented had been successfully neutralized. They were wrong in a way that was going to cost them everything. Here is what silence actually is when a person deploys it from strength rather than from fear. It is the most disorienting move available. Opposition built for noise cannot calibrate to silence. It is built to respond to reaction, to manage counter-narratives, to stay one step ahead of retaliation. When you go quiet, the machinery that was built specifically to manage you has nothing to process, nothing to counter, and nothing to contain. Nature abhors a vacuum. Every move made in the space you deliberately vacated became visible in a way it never could have been while you were still in the room generating counter noise. You did not orchestrate anyone's downfall. You simply stepped aside and let existing patterns that were always there, now operating without the cover your engagement had been providing, become completely apparent to anyone paying attention. Truth, when given enough space, always surfaces on its own. It does not need a spokesperson. It does not need to be scheduled, packaged, or announced. It just needs you to stop standing in front of it. You got out of the way, and the truth walked out on its own. This is where you stop being someone things were happening to and became someone things were happening through. The pressure did something to you, but not what anyone intended. The intention was to diminish you, to wear down your confidence, erode your belief in yourself, reduce your sense of what was possible until you voluntarily accepted a smaller version of your own story. And for a stretch, it worked on the surface. There were periods where the weight of everything was not philosophical or metaphorical but physical, sitting on your chest like something with real mass. There were stretches where the question was not how to win, but whether getting up was still a reasonable proposition. Sustained, unrelenting pressure does not destroy, it reveals. It strips away every version of yourself that was performance, that was learned behavior, that was constructed to manage other people's perceptions of you. It strips away the ego structures that were protecting you from your own depth. It strips away the comfortable narratives about who you are and what you can handle. And when all of that is gone, when every false layer has been burned completely through, what remains is not rubble. What remains is the core, the actual core, the thing at the center of you that existed before any of the conditioning and before any of the survival strategies you constructed to navigate a world that was not always safe for someone with your level of calling. And that core is extraordinary. You discovered this in the quiet, in the fire, in the stretches with no audience and no rescue coming. You found out who you actually are when there is nothing left to hide behind. And who you actually are is someone that the version of you from before the fire would not have believed was possible. You are sharper. You are cleaner. You are making decisions from a completely different place now, from the ground instead of from the wound, from knowing instead of from needing. That ground-level shift in where your choices originate is what makes every move you make now land differently. You are not trying to prove anything to anyone. You are simply being what you spent all that invisible time becoming. And when a person is fully, cleanly, without apology being what they actually are, the world arranges itself around that. The world has no other option. They built the furnace to destroy you. They built you instead. Somewhere between the fire, the silence, and the transformation happening below the surface, you developed something quietly and without announcement, a faculty so refined by everything you had been through that it now operates almost beneath your own conscious awareness. You developed the ability to read what is actually happening underneath what is being presented. You let your opposition show you exactly who they were without ever letting them know you were watching. You absorbed everything without reacting, without tipping your hand, without giving the signal that would have sent them scrambling to regroup. You allowed the belief to persist that they were still operating undetected while you catalogued every move, every contradiction, every moment where what was said and what was done occupied entirely different realities. You were not passive during this period. You were hunting, quietly, patiently, with the kind of focused calm that only someone who has already survived the worst-case scenario can access, because the worst-case scenario no longer holds the same terror it once did. When you had everything you needed, when the picture was complete and the pattern was undeniable, you did not make a loud move, you made a quiet removal. You stepped out of the architecture that had been built around you and left it standing empty. There was no confrontation. There was no farewell designed to make anyone understand what they were losing. You left, clean, complete, already facing forward. Here is what discernment does. Beyond protecting you from what is coming at you, it shows you what is being held for you. The same faculty that lets you see through what is false also lets you recognize what is genuine when it finally arrives. You stop wasting investment on counterfeits. You stop walking into rooms designed to diminish you because you can feel the architecture of a space before you ever step through the door. Every yes you give now is a cleaner yes. Every no arrives faster and with more certainty. You are no longer deliberating from anxiety. You are deciding from knowing. That is the difference between spending your life reacting to what happens to you and spending your life directing what you move toward. While the fire was burning and the silence was doing its work and the discernment was sharpening, you were building. You were not performing and not positioning for the appearance of progress. You were building real things and solid things, things constructed from genuine experience rather than assembled from frameworks designed for someone else. You were building a relationship with yourself so honest and so complete that you no longer needed external sources to confirm your own worth. You were building standards so clear that you could walk past attractive-looking opportunities and know immediately whether they were designed for who you actually are or for the version of you that used to shrink to fit other people's expectations. You were building the kind of internal architecture that, once established, permanently changes the quality of what your external life can hold. There are two ways to arrive at a good season. One way is to have circumstances align in your favor through no particular development of your own character. That kind of season is beautiful while it lasts, but it is fragile, built on conditions, not on you. When conditions shift, the season ends. The other way is to become someone who can generate, sustain, and protect a good season through the quality of who they actually are. That kind of season does not depend on circumstances remaining favorable. It travels with you. It is defended from the inside. It belongs to you, not because of what happened around you, but because of what you became within you. That second version is exactly what you built in the invisible season. And now the surface is breaking open. The growth is so sudden, so dramatic, so impossible to explain by conventional metrics that anyone who watched the ground and saw nothing for so long is now standing in front of something vast and still climbing, with no explanation for what they are looking at. This is not the beginning. It only looks like the beginning from the outside. For you, this moment is simply the surface expression of something that has been complete for longer than anyone watching knows. You are not suddenly becoming. You already became. What is visible now is the above-ground portion of a structure whose foundations are so deep they are essentially permanent. Nothing arriving in this season can knock you over. Not the success, not the attention, not the new access to spaces you were previously locked out of, because none of it is greater than what is already rooted underneath. You grew the foundation first. Everything else is simply what the foundation was always going to eventually hold. The truth surfaced. It surfaced not because you released it, not because you finally broke the silence and put evidence in front of people who needed convincing. The truth surfaced because truth, left with enough space and enough time, always does. It is never a matter of if, it is only ever a matter of when. The same narratives that were constructed to contain you started collapsing under their own internal contradictions. The same alliances built to work against you started fracturing along fault lines that were always there, invisible when you were the common target, holding everything together, fully exposed the moment you stepped away. The carefully managed presentations of people who had supposedly made all the right calls started showing their seams, and you did not have to say a single word. You had done something far more powerful than issuing any statement, gathering any witnesses, or finding any platform from which to present your case. You had become undeniable. You had not become undeniable in a loud way, or in a way that required a press release or a moment of public vindication. You had simply become someone whose life made a statement that no lie was sophisticated enough to contradict. The peace you carried made the statement. The authority in how you moved made the statement. The shift in your energy from someone managing survival to someone operating from abundance made the statement. And the people who had built their certainty on the premise that you were small were now doing the most uncomfortable thing they had ever done. They were watching, quietly, trying to revise the story they had been telling themselves about who you were and what was ever going to be possible for your life. The revision is not going well for them. You do not need to witness it to receive its full benefit. You do not need their accounting, their acknowledgement, or their apology. The reckoning is happening whether or not you are in the room, and the freedom that comes from that, the freedom of someone whose vindication does not require anyone else's confession, is one of the most complete freedoms available to a human being. You are not waiting for anyone to admit anything. You are already living past it. That is not just a win. That is sovereignty. Everything up to this point has been about what you survived, what you built, what you refused to become, and what you discovered about yourself in the process. This part is about what you stepped into. You stopped forcing things. Not because you gave up on what you wanted, but because you realized that forcing was always the problem. Not because effort is wrong, but because forcing your way into a space that was not designed for you only gives you access to a space that was not designed for you. You did not want access. You wanted arrival, and arrival requires that the space be ready for you, which requires that you be ready for the space, which required everything that came before this moment to happen first. It all happened, and now you are ready. There is a profound difference between being chosen and being recognized. Being chosen means someone picked you, which also means that person has the power to unpick you. Being recognized means someone finally sees what was always there, what was never conditional on their perception, what exists fully and completely regardless of anyone's ongoing opinion of it. You are being recognized. You receive it without desperation. You receive it without the trembling neediness of someone who has been waiting far too long for someone to finally see them. You receive it with the steadiness of someone who always knew this was coming, even in the seasons when all the evidence pointed elsewhere. That is what dominion looks like. Not loudness, steadiness. The arrival is not a destination, it is a demonstration. Every room you enter from this point forward is living proof of what was built in the invisible season. Every moment where your presence shifts the energy in a space is the above-ground evidence of the underground work. You are not just arriving at a new chapter. You are the evidence, walking, breathing, building, thriving, that the process works when you trust it completely and refuse to abandon it when it asks the most of you. While you were arriving, while you were stepping into the spaces opening for you, receiving the recognition being extended to you, and operating from the energy of someone who has done the full work and emerged on the other side. A very different season was unfolding for the people who built the furnace. Their season was one of exposure. It was not the dramatic, cinematic kind of exposure where everything spills out at once. It was the slower, more thorough, more permanent kind, the kind that comes from the compounding weight of choices that were always going to accumulate their consequences. Every compromise made in private, every manipulation deployed, every shortcut taken, every relationship leveraged and discarded on the way to a position that was never internally prepared for. All of it arrived, steadily and without exception, without anyone needing to orchestrate its arrival. And none of it required your involvement, your orchestration, or a single unit of your hard-won energy. You were busy building, you were busy arriving, you were busy receiving what was already yours. And while you were doing all of that, time, patient, thorough, completely relentless time, was doing what time always does to things built on performance rather than truth. It was revealing what was underneath. Your life is already making the statement. It is making it in a language so clear that no counter-narrative is sophisticated enough to answer it. What is happening to the people who worked against you is not your responsibility, and it is not your entertainment. It is simply what happens when the law of cause and effect is given enough time and enough space to complete its work. You are not the agent of anyone's undoing. You are the evidence that what is built in truth outlasts what is built in strategy. You have somewhere important to be. You have a life calling for your full attention, your full presence, and your full capacity, and none of that should be spent watching what unfolds for people who thought they could stop what was always going to happen for you. You were never in competition with anyone. The frame of competition was always wrong. You were never auditioning for a role that anyone had the power to grant or deny. You were being appointed to something operating on an entirely different level than anything the opposition had access to. And a real appointment, the kind that comes from alignment rather than approval, does not require a panel, a vote, or anyone's permission. It simply requires you to be ready and to show up. You are ready. You are showing up. The authority you carry now is not borrowed. It is not contingent. It is not performing for continued approval. It is built from the inside, from the ground up, from the decisions you made in every season when no one was watching and nothing external was confirming that those decisions would ever amount to anything. It is built from the root system, from the fire, from the silence, from your refusal to become what hurt you, from the discipline of choosing discernment over revenge and character over comfort. The thing that makes this authority categorically different from the kind granted by other people is that it travels with you into every conversation, every challenge, every season that comes next. It is not location dependent or relationship dependent, it is you dependent. And you are now the most solid, most rooted, most aligned version of yourself that has ever existed. That is not fragile, that is permanent. What has been established in you cannot be revoked by the people who tried to dismantle you, because those people were never the source, and what does not come from them cannot be removed by them. You are operating at a level above the transaction they thought they were running. The authority you are walking in was not activated by the win-in. It was activated by the obedience. It was activated the day you chose your character over your revenge. It was activated the day you kept going in the invisible season with no confirmation that it was going to pay off. It was activated every single time you made the quiet, costly, unglamorous choice that no one was there to applaud. The win did not make you who you are. You were already who you are. The win is simply the part that made it visible to people who were not yet able to see in the dark. You were always this. The fire just removed everything that was covering it. Look at what grew. What grew did so not in spite of everything that happened, but because of it. That is the part that makes this story not just satisfying but poetic, the part that makes it feel less like luck and more like design. The exact conditions created against you, the isolation, the pressure, The withdrawal, the orchestrated difficulty, were not obstacles to your growth. They were the specific requirements for the kind of growth that produces what you are now. You cannot build a foundation that deep without the weight that pressed down on it. You cannot develop the discernment you carry without the specific exposure to the patterns you were forced to navigate. You cannot arrive at the authority you now hold without having had every external prop removed so that you had no choice but to find what was inside. What was designed as a burial was functioning all along as a preparation program. And now what grew from the exact ground they were standing on is vast and still climbing. The mouths that swore you were finished are quiet now, or they are loud in the specific way that people get loud when they are trying to cover the sound of their own miscalculation. The ones who mocked your stillness are now watching your rise with the particular expression of people who placed a confident bet on the wrong outcome and have to live with the knowledge of it. And what do you feel? Not the vengeful satisfaction of someone who needed this moment to finally feel okay. You feel the quiet, grounded completeness of someone who always knew this was the only possible ending to a story being written at a level above the one the opposition had access to. You are not surprised, you are confirmed. Surprise is what happens when something exceeds your expectations. Confirmation is what happens when the evidence finally catches up to what you already knew. You knew in the invisible season. You knew in the fire. You knew in the silence. You kept moving forward without proof, because the knowing itself was the proof. And now the external evidence is simply confirming what you never stopped understanding about yourself and about where this was always heading. This is what dominion looks like. Not the loud declaration of victory by someone who was not sure they were going to win. The quiet, solid, almost casual arrival of someone who never considered any other outcome as the final destination. You did not scramble to get here. You grew here. You were shaped by everything that happened along the way until the version of you that arrived at this moment is exactly the version this moment required. The seed chose to root instead of rot. That was the decision. Everything else was always going to follow. This life belongs to you. Not because it was handed to you, but because you earned it at a level so deep that it cannot be argued with, undermined, or revised by anyone who was never the source of it. Whatever was planned against you became fuel. Whatever was meant to bury you became the foundation. Whatever you did in the dark, in the silence, in the fire, in the invisible seasons when nothing was confirming you and everything required you to simply keep becoming, it worked. Every single piece of it worked. You won. Not a moment, not a single battle, the whole thing, the long game, the game that was being played at a level above the one anyone running against you ever understood, the game that was always going to end exactly like this. And what is yours? The life, the authority, the dominion, the fruit of every private decision made when making that decision was the hardest thing available to you. It is already here. It arrived quietly, the way everything real does. It arrived without fanfare and without anyone handing it to you, because no one had to hand you what was always permanently and irreversibly yours. Go live like it, with your full chest, with the steadiness of someone who has been through the fire and knows exactly what they are made of now. The chosen one does not announce the victory, the chosen one becomes it. You already have.